My guest today is Tamon George, a renowned marketing strategist and co-founder of the Creative Theory Agency. He's led branded content campaigns with major brands like Google, Nike, Amazon, and the Creative Theory Agency was named the Ad Age Small Agency of the Year in 2020. Tamon has also been recognized by the Washington Business Journal as one of the 40 under 40 in 2021. Tamon, you started as a football player in Canada in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. How do you go from playing football to then getting involved in policy with the Canadian Embassy and founding a creative agency?
Yeah, I think a really good question. My interests are wide and vast. I think when I was younger, and mind you, this was a long time ago, so I was much younger then, but I was an athlete all my life. And the thing about sports is it teaches you to, believe in yourself and believe that anything is possible. And when I was in Canada, obviously I'm a Canadian citizen, and then I wanted to kind of extend my educational experience, and my football playing days were done, and I wanted to move to the US, and I did that as a student. And then, of course, being here in Washington, D.C., you're exposed to some of the most impactful conversations that are happening around the world, and I wanted to be a part of that. And that led me to a short little stint at the Canadian Embassy as well, working on digital trade policy, which was incredibly fun and insightful. And from there, that really kind of opened my eyes into digital marketing, digital advertising, digital messaging and communication. And then when I was finishing my MBA here in DC, I kind of dove full speed into marketing, and that led me into a lot of creative conversations. And I just found a space that I love. In 2015, like you said, Gary and I co-founded Creative Theory Agency.
And at what time do you get interested on AI, or you find out about this tool that more than likely will have an impact on the business you created?
Yeah, I think AI right now is special, right? There's energy behind all of the investments that are being made in the particular tools and how they can transform, work in basically any industry, and the advertising industry falls into that category too. And so for us, we really wanted to find what would be our kind of vision and point of view on the particular tools. And where we really landed was in generative AI tools as kind of our kind of North Star for how we would begin to incorporate generative AI into our work stream.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you look across the industry right now, or even any industry, people are trying to identify how AI can support operational tasks, how it can support efficiency, and how it can kind of remove some tasks from kind of our day to day. And we kind of went to the other side of that spectrum and said, well, what can we create with it? Right? Not how can it help us, respond to emails faster and things like that, those utility items. And certainly those things still are done for us now, but we wanted to go as far into the future as possible and simply ask the questions like, what can we make? What type of imagery can we make? What can we design? What type of film and video can we create? And we learned really fast that there's some things that can be done and some things that can't. And some things are a little bit more challenging than others for the tools. And the thing about the tools, the trajectory of the generative AI tools is really interesting, that some of the things we can't do now, we anticipate we'll be able to do them in, 6 months or 12. And so for us, we really started digging into what can we make, and how quickly can we make it, and how can we use kind of our lived experience to make these things the most innovative and creative that they can be.
And I want to zero in on that last thing you just said, right? Because I know that you previously said that AI is only as good as its learning and its inputs. And now you're mentioning your life experiences. So would you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, there's this idea that we talk about here at Creative Theory Agency as it relates to AI about cultural consciousness. And that is essentially how we like to frame the idea of kind of the lived human experience being the most integral component into what we put into our prompts and what we put into the particular tool. And so this idea of cultural consciousness is thinking about how does kind of the zeitgeist that we exist in now show up in the particular tools, and it's not lost. And so as we kind of find our own perspective and POV of how we should be using these tools to develop things that are really creative, it always comes back to our lived experience. It comes back to our wealth of creative knowledge. It comes back to the wealth of creative understanding that our creative director or art director has, or our copywriter or somebody else. And we're able to infuse so much of that information into what we're asking from these particular tools. So that idea is kind of our main POV of how we will continue to approach generative AI.
Okay. And I'm assuming you sort of get to this takeaway through your experience and what you notice as you start prompting with tools and trying them out. So was there any first impression that sort of gave you that light bulb moment when you're like, okay, there's got to be a way to get a different output from these tools?
Yeah, I think that the thing that we were asking, of the particular tools were uncommon if you look at the aggregate of what is being asked by these particular tools. So if we're trying to, develop imagery of a family or a Black family or a multi-generational family or anything of that nature, these things they have trouble sometimes appreciating the requests that come from the world as we see it. Right. And that is because at scale, it is being requested less in that particular way. And so it was kind of clear to us that the tools are learning from what people are requesting and how they're being prompted. And so it was incredibly important for us to then kind of deep dive into, well, let's create our own approach to how we ask and request from the tools and ensure that it's representative and respectful of kind of us and our lived experience and the type of creative that we love to see. And we knew that that could be a really interesting value add. And so we really figured out that there is this way where, POV from a creative perspective could be different than everybody else's. And that would be a good thing. And so we figured that, it's in our best interest to, keep asking and keep requesting and prompting in challenging ways to the tools.
And when we talk about prompts, many times, let's say the average person using ChatGPT, or let's say, Midjourney seems to have a little barrier of entry. So let's say, DALL-E or Adobe or Midjourney, why not? But folks focus on positive prompts, right? Telling the tool, this is what I want to see. But what I'm interested, based on my own experience using the tools, and results that sometimes tend to be a bit biased on how they display things. For example, I can say as an Argentine, if I put certain things about Argentina, I'm either getting a gaucho or a football, soccer for Americans ball, right?
Yeah.
It is because of the training data, right? So when you talk about these prompts that the agency is using, are you forced to be using negative prompts in the sense that this is what I don't want to see on the image?
Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't gone to the inverse to ask what we don't want to see. But what we have learned to your point is that we have to be hyper specific about what we do want to see. Right. And so that kind of goes back to, do the tools understand our POV and how specific do we need to be to get what we're looking for versus, say, the majority of the particular tool users at this particular time. And so the inverse hasn't quite been beneficial for us, but at the same time, how specific do we need to be, to get our bare minimum of representation in these particular tools? And I think there's going to be an interesting future where, language learning models will need to be paired with particular cultural understanding and cultural consciousness as we kind of articulate it, for people to be able to not have to be as specific to get the type of requests or outputs that they're requesting from the tools.
Well, thank you for that answer. Now, Tamon, when we learn about the Creative Theory Agency, we can see that you have worked on an array of amazing campaigns with huge clients, right? But I think kind of like the star that shines brighter is this campaign. What prompted you? So I want to go in there, so folks can learn about this campaign, but also I'm very interested, and I feel super dumb asking the question like this, but what prompted project?
What's interesting is, we, Creative Theory Agency, wanted to have a very particular introductory moment for AI into our company, but also as our company continues to do cool and creative work to show, who we are and what our core is. And so what prompted you was really a way for us to storytell about people who are creating access in a number of different fields and how that could relate to people who are creating access in AI, right? There's a couple different conversations that we wanted to have. And so obviously being marketers, we took it upon ourselves to create this particular campaign and go live with it. And those conversations were, how do we get more people of color to see themselves as users and participants of the tools? But then also, too, knowing that the advertising industry shapes kind of the cultural zeitgeist, how people ultimately see themselves, what brands we associate with. How does the advertising industry underscore this incredibly important idea that whatever the future is of these particular tools, the best future will exist when the vast majority of us has access and are using and incorporating AI into different workflows, right? And so how we saw it is there's a clear precedence for moments like this when new technology is emerging. There are typically some groups of people who are significantly further ahead than others and benefit significantly more, 10 times more than others. And we know that historically who those communities are and who is in front and who's behind. And so as marketers, it was incredibly important for us to shine a light in the way that we best know how, which is to encourage our partners and our brands that we work with and the advertising industry writ large to remind the makers of the particular tools that the best outcome, most creative outcomes, most innovative outcomes of all of these tools will come when vastly differing perspectives are using the tools, different people are using the tools, and the language learning models are learning from many different types and kinds of people as well.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, first, you want to highlight a thing that is like, okay, we got this technology, it's exciting, but we're seeing that it seems like it's the same old folks that usually benefit or usually get to leverage these are the ones gaining this advantage, and we're missing out on a huge opportunity, which also probably makes financial sense to have different perspectives so you can differentiate and resonate with more people. Now, when you released this campaign, did you get any reaction from brands and partners that either, I want to focus on both, right? The ones that were encouraging because it went beyond the performative and actually got to action, but also the ones that were maybe surprising? Feel free to share what you can share.
Yeah, no, I think we're really fortunate in that, our partners know what we stand for as an agency. And I think because of that, everybody that we talked to was receptive of this particular creative idea. And the creative was picked up by a number of different outlets. We had articles in Ad Age and Adweek and a number of others. I think there was about a dozen places that picked up the story and the work because it was so timely and so necessary, but also so true, right? I think it would be far-reaching idea to think that AI isn't for everybody and that generative AI should be left only to the select few. And I think the POV that we had in this particular work was that, we should all be seeing ourselves as participants in this particular moment, and our industry should do something to ensure that, right? And so fortunately, everybody that we spoke to and was able to, support via either introductions or to ensure that we could get access to the space that we needed for the out-of-home moments and things like that, because our billboards that we did in DC were, they're 100 feet wide and 50 feet tall. And so there's some pretty big investments there that we had to make as an agency to make sure that this thing could kind of go to market appropriately. All of those connections were necessary. All of those, favors were incredibly impactful for this work to see the light of day in the way that it did. So across the board, there's a lot of people who supported this mission immediately, who certainly wanted to see this particular campaign go out in this way and to hopefully kind of, 10x it in the future if we decide to do it again, say in a different city or with more stories or more heroes that we highlight.
As you were working on this campaign, I'm putting it out there on Washington, D.C., I'm sure you had a lot of conversations about roadblocks for folks, again, for everyone to actually be able to use these tools. So what are the main roadblocks or the main things that you think are stopping everyone from accessing these tools?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. When you think of the people that are the largest voices right now in AI, it's one very particular type of person. And so there are few leaders in the space who have been given a microphone to show how all people exist in this particular moment. So I think that in and of itself is a barrier that we're going to have to break through, and that takes time. But also, I think some of the biggest companies in the world need to be intentional and thoughtful about how they showcase the work that they're doing and who in particular is doing it. So I think that's one. I think the other is that at this exact moment, we're still in an early adopter phase, and that's okay, right? But also too, certain industries right now are pushing faster than others. And I think we just happen to be in the ad space, which is pushing incredibly quickly and fast. But what we do know is that the more we can kind of shift some of the tools towards kind of everyday use and being incorporated and used by more and more people in all industries, kind of the better, right? And so I
Mm-hmm.
think those are a couple of barriers, but ultimately, certainly some things in this early adoption phase will be behind paywalls and things like that. We acknowledge that, these are companies still trying to get off the ground a lot of times. But the simple kind of rudimentary ways to engage with AI, we need all people as best as possible to kind of be tinkering in this moment, right? That is, ultimately kind of like the gateway, if you will, into either developing or creating or using these tools to, become more efficient or proficient at your particular job and what have you. So right now, there's a phase where nobody knows entirely where some of these systems and tools are going. But the more people who see themselves as participants and even using some of these things to gain a little bit of familiarity with the potential outcomes is kind of the better.
Folks are going to be listening to or watching this episode, and they might be asking themselves, all right, so what's a quick action I could take to promote this, to get other folks to get involved, to try the tools? What's working for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think for the campaign in general, we are still trying to find ways to make new connections to deliver this creative in different cities. So I think certainly there's more stories we can tell of people who are creating access in the AR world in different cities and doing a number of different things. The flip side of this, though, as well, is a lot more simplistic and ultimately a lot more humble and has quite a bit of humility. Look at
Mm-hmm.
the community around you, and continue to engage in conversations to get people engaging with the particular tools. And I'll give you an example. I've been trying to get my parents who are retired,
Mm-hmm.
when they have to write a letter or if they have to look something up, I'll encourage them to pass by ChatGPT. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a little things that we can do that are incredibly helpful. Even I had a young friend of mine who needed help with a resume. And I said that we're going to learn how to do this using these particular tools. Right. And it's not just me doing that on their behalf, but that particular young person learning that tool in that way at that time could help them immensely in the near future. So I think there's some big things. Obviously, with the campaign, we want to continue to expand it, but from a smaller standpoint, we need more people to see themselves as engaged and see themselves as a participant in whatever tool can kind of benefit them, because we know that across the board, some people will benefit greatly, and we want everybody to have a piece of that opportunity as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of opportunities, right, and bringing different voices, and by different voices, I'm not only meaning from different backgrounds, but also, different experiences in life, like different ages,
Yeah.
right? But one conversation that all it takes, especially if you go on certain social networks, there seems to be a backlash. In 2020, every company was literally knocking the door down so they could put their DEI department together, and they were advertising it everywhere. Cut to 2024, and many companies are like, well, maybe we don't need this anymore, especially now that in the US, at least, we're in an election year, is diversity, inclusivity, even like with what happened we're recording this in July 2024, so a couple of weeks ago, in case you're listening to this, far in the future, candidate to president almost got shot. There was a lot of conversation and people somehow were blaming it on diversity and inclusion, right? So
Yeah.
especially as someone who's in Washington, has anyone in government, especially because you have a policy background, right? Like reach out to the agency, see if you guys can help us, or like, have you heard crickets? How does that work? Especially in Washington. I'm interested because it seems like everyone is either a barista there or working in politics.
Well, from an AI standpoint, no. We're pretty squarely in the creative space, and we haven't, which sounds crazy, done really any political work in our history, but we are connected to a lot of people who are in that world. And so we've had some pretty interesting conversations in the last few months for sure. What I do know, to your point, there is certainly a large swath of people who think that inclusivity is a negative idea. I don't quite understand that, but I do know those people still existed. They didn't just kind of spawn in the last, month or 2 months or 6 months. Those opinions persisted well through 2020 and up until now, and they'll persist presumably well into the future. But what I do think is that from this perspective of AI, we be concerned. I don't think we can collectively give that much attention, because this moment that we're in now, is akin to, the birth of the internet. Right. And so certainly, in the dot-com boom and things like that, there were people who, were moving incredibly quickly to develop and not necessarily thinking about who they were developing for. But now we're just in a different time where there's greater economic opportunity across the board. And some of the investments that were made in 2020 up until now are still going to create wins for communities into the next decade. And so I think as it relates to what we're seeing now, there will continue to be this idea that AI can be a transformative tool. It can be transformative for communities. And I think with some of those conversations dwindling and dying down, certainly that we've seen from some pretty large corporations, this is kind of a new opportunity to kind of arc back up. And so hopefully I think there's more people who are talking about AI in that way, because we certainly think it has the power to do that.
You mentioned the dot-com boom, right? And one thing that happened, especially through time, we see it with the dot-com, the metaverse, crypto, etc., is that we get a bunch of hype, then things might not really pan out as they were promised, right? And we see a lot of AI. I mean, if we're realistic, it's not doing 70% of the things. And it was never intended, right? Because at the end of the day, it's learning and it's gathering an output from what it learned plus what you ask it to deliver, right? But like, what's your take on this AI bubble and the possibility of it bursting, or like having this reality check that we say?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I was just talking about this idea to a mentor of mine just the other day on Friday of last week, actually. So there's this idea that some of the most transformative companies emerge in the second wind, right? And so the second wind is when there's this, there's the first phase, large capital investments, everybody's racing, and then there's kind of a quieting time where something feels like it is going to lag behind some of the promises that were made in that first initial wave. Second wind is where the most transformative companies are often built, right? And so that second wave is when some of the lessons have been learned. An initial batch of incredibly fast companies got there first, and ultimately some of them don't stick around. But the ones that are truly transformative and have kind of surveyed the landscape for long enough often come in that second wind. So I'm not entirely sure where we are right now. I think there's some research that shows some of the capital investments that are going into AI right now have slowed in the last couple quarters of this particular year, 2024. And so to me, what this kind of signals is that there will now be kind of this creation of some of the transformative companies over the next decade that have really seen some of the failings of, other early investing companies or things like that, and developed these really unique entryways into usefulness for the masses. And I think historically, the second wind has been where, the Googles and Metas and et ceteras have been created, and they often weren't first to the game. So to me, time is still now, time is still in the next little bit, but I'm interested to see, the types of companies that will be created in 2025 and 2026 when we have a much clearer picture of what's possible.
Many folks, might see you as an authority in the space, someone that talks a lot about AI. I know you were giving some talks, like, for example, we can DI ourselves out of AI, among many others. But I want to focus on the creative aspect, right? I'm sure you go to bars for drinks with colleagues and they go like, dude, how are you using this tool? Like, how is there any tricks you have? So like, I go beyond ChatGPT telling me, I hope this email finds you well. So let's talk about those little everyday things, and the most boring, the better, because we all hate the boring stuff. So like, how are you leveraging in your personal work, right, to deal with the stuff you don't want to deal?
Yeah, so I'll just give one example from a creative standpoint. Our creative teams are tasked with some really unique pieces of work, and I'm often tasked with reviewing some of that work and things like that. For me, when I'm developing early stage ideas now, instead of mood boarding, I'm kind of mood creating, right? And I think that's interesting because it really has we have to deliver our own creative to develop the type of imagery that we're thinking about making or showing to a client, instead of trying to pull inspiration from, Pinterest or somewhere else or something like that. So basically, instead of going to some different, design places and things like that to pull inspiration, now you're essentially creating your own original work, which is the inspiration that you want to pull from as we try and, develop creative concepts. The other thing that I'll say too, from an imagery standpoint, we don't really use reference imagery the same way as we did a year ago now. Now we'll just make the reference image that we want to see, right? Everything down from the type of lens that we'll be using to where the sun is in the background to who's in the foreground and what the aperture of the camera is and all that type of stuff. We can create that image and show the client, like, this is what we want this particular shot to look like, instead of trying to pull that shot from some other commercial somewhere or whatever. We'll just go ahead and make it. Everything down to how we storyboard the images of what we're trying to execute. We can make those now. And instead of, working with a few different storyboarders and things like that, now we can just draw up the image, in real time, and we could iterate that 10 times in 10 minutes, right? And so from a creative standpoint, basically, we're using our own creative energy significantly more sharper now in our inspiration phase and our ideation phase, because we're pulling less from, other things that have been created, and now it's all just coming from us here at CTA.
What are your 3 favorite tools?
So we spend a lot of time in Midjourney. I'll give 2. We spend a lot of time in Midjourney. And then as of late, Copilot as well has been incredibly impressive. And I think those are 2 unique ends of the spectrum. Midjourney we really use when we're creating imagery and different types of mood boards and want to ideate on what something could look like or could feel like. And then Copilot has been pretty interesting in its ability to store information. Right. And so when we're kind of working with it in a track, it'll kind of house all the information that we've prompted or asked or requested of it thus far. And that's been interesting for it to kind of learn as we ask it and ask it and ask it, and, kind of keep it focused on task. And Midjourney, we're a little bit more all over the place, but those are the 2 that we work with the most that have been pretty beneficial.
And if you got to start all over again in 2024, what would you recommend folks do first? Beyond ChatGPT, because everybody's using it, but usually that's as far as it goes.
Yeah, I think I think it depends on the industry that you're in.
Yeah, creative.
I do think that Yeah. I think ChatGPT is a great place to start, but I also think there's, Mid-Journey is second base for sure. Well, let's say ChatGPT is home base, Mid-Journey is second base, and then somewhere between there and home base is developing your own kind of proprietary way of prompting, which I think is pretty interesting as well. And I also feel like there is so much learning that can be done on YouTube and TikTok. You really kind of just have to find the one thing that it is you care about. And from there, the learning on that particular thing is infinite. So if I can give any advice, if I was at square one now, find something to care about and be interested in, because it does seem so incredibly vast, like you said. But when you find something that you're interested in, or that you have a particular, fancy towards, whether it's, making design work or imagery or even, automation and things like that, there is a niche and a community out there waiting for you. You just have to find what it is and go.
And creatively, is there anything that you're dreaming to do now with AI that you're like, it wasn't possible before, but I'm feeling pretty, maybe you didn't even get there yet, right? But like something that are like, I think with AI, I'm going to be able to like get where my vision is.
Yeah. We're very big. We're very bullish right now on video, and I think that is we're constantly trying to make video for ourselves right now. Obviously, we have a little bit of a ways to go before that type of thing can be created for clients. But also, too, there's a ton of legal conversations that exist there as well. But video is an incredible frontier, one that gets exponentially better by the week. That is an area that we are certainly doubling down on and are very, very focused on. I don't think we know what we want to make there yet, but it's going to be something.
So, Tamon, first of all, thank you for your time today. We discussed, we talk a little bit about AI, some tools, how we can be intentional about prompting and the difference that will make on the final output. Now, for those folks that are wondering where can they learn more about you and the work the Creative Theory Agency is doing, where do we send them?
Yeah, I think great question. The best place to learn more about me and our work is creativetheory.agency. So www.creativetheory.agency. That's our main website for the company. Of course, I'm incredibly accessible on LinkedIn. It's just my first name, Tamon, and then my last name, George. And I'm pretty responsive on those platforms. So if anybody needs to get a hold of me or is interested in what we're doing, certainly would love to be connected. There's a lot to accomplish.
For all those of you that are watching or listening right now, we'll be adding all the links on the description, both on the video and the podcast. So be sure to check all the links. We'll make sure you have access to see Tamon's excellent work. I've been enjoying it a lot. And Tamon, thank you so much for your time. We know you're a busy guy, so we appreciate you popping in for a little shop talk. And for the rest of you, thank you for watching till the end. And I hope to see you again. Have a good one and see you next week with another episode. Goodbye.
Amo la creación en mi pantalla, bits y bytes en danza, todo brilla, cada código que escribo canta. Sabor a cumbia.